The ivory satin wedding dress hung in the back of Adelaide Lawson's wardrobe like a ghost, untouched for 3 years but never forgotten. A constant reminder of the life she had lost when cholera swept through Ogden, Utah Territory in the summer of 1878. Adelaide stood in the doorway of her general store, watching the afternoon dust devils dance down the main street. At 25, she had already lived through more grief than most women twice her age. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 3 years, buried in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. She had been married for only 8 months before the sickness took him. 8 precious months that felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. The dress remained in her wardrobe because she could not bear to part with it, though looking at it brought a sharp pain to her chest every time she opened that particular door. The bell above her shop entrance chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Mrs. Henderson shuffling in, her basket already prepared for her weekly shopping. Adelaide forced a smile and moved behind the counter, her hands already reaching for the items she knew the elderly woman would request. This was her life now, predictable and safe, measured out in pounds of flour and yards of fabric. She told herself she was content. She told herself it was enough. That evening, as she closed up shop and climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above the store, Adelaide paused at her bedroom door. Some impulse she could not name drew her to the wardrobe. She opened it slowly, pushing aside her everyday dresses until her fingers found the smooth satin. She pulled it out carefully, holding it up in the fading light from her window. The dress was beautiful, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her mother had sewn it by hand, working for months to make it perfect. Adelaide pressed the fabric to her face, breathing in deeply, but after 3 years it no longer smelled like anything at all. She was hanging it back when she heard shouting from the street below. Adelaide moved to the window and looked down to see a crowd gathering near the saloon. Her heart quickened as she recognized the signs of trouble. Fights were not uncommon in Ogden, especially on Friday nights when the ranch hands came to town with their wages burning holes in their pockets. She was about to turn away, to mind her own business as she always did, when she heard a woman scream. Adelaide did not think. She grabbed her shawl and rushed down the stairs, out into the street where the crowd had grown larger. She pushed her way through, her small frame allowing her to slip between the onlookers. In the center of the commotion, a man had a young woman by the arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave bruises. The woman was crying, pleading with him to let her go. "That is enough," Adelaide heard herself say, her voice sounding stronger than she felt. "Release her immediately." The man turned to look at her, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "This is none of your concern, woman. This is my wife, and I will do as I please." "Your wife is a person, not property," Adelaide replied, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Let her go, or I will fetch the sheriff." The man laughed, a cruel sound that made Adelaide's stomach turn. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension, deep and calm and carrying an authority that made everyone turn to look. "You heard the lady. Let her go." Adelaide followed the crowd's gaze to see a man stepping forward from the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that seemed to assess the entire situation in a single glance. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a cowboy, his boots worn from long days in the saddle, but there was something in his bearing that commanded respect. A gun belt hung low on his hips, but his hands remained at his sides, relaxed but ready. "And who the hell are you?" the drunk man demanded, though his grip on his wife loosened slightly. "Just someone passing through," the cowboy replied, taking another step closer. but I was raised to believe a man does not put his hands on a woman in anger. So I am going to ask you one more time, politely, to let the lady go. Then I suggest you sleep off whatever is making you act like a fool." For a long moment, no one moved. Adelaide held her breath, waiting to see if the situation would escalate into violence. But something in the cowboy's steady gaze must have penetrated the drunk man's haze, because he suddenly released his wife's arm with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. Adelaide caught her, steadying her as the man stormed off down the street, muttering curses. The crowd began to disperse, the excitement over. The young wife was crying harder now, clutching Adelaide's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Adelaide helped her to a bench outside the mercantile, sitting with her while she calmed down. The cowboy had disappeared, and Adelaide found herself looking for him in the thinning crowd, but he was nowhere to be seen. After a while, the young woman's sister arrived to take her home, and Adelaide was left alone in the gathering dusk. She returned to her apartment, her heart still beating faster than normal. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking not about the frightening confrontation but about the stranger who had intervened. There had been something in his voice, a gentleness beneath the strength, that had stirred something in her she thought had died with Thomas. The next morning, Adelaide woke early as always and went downstairs to open the store. She was arranging a new shipment of canned goods when the bell chimed. She looked up to see the cowboy from the previous evening standing in her doorway, his hat in his hands. "Good morning," he said, his voice polite. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all," Adelaide replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "How can I help you?" "I need some supplies," he said, moving toward the counter. "Trail rations, mostly. Some coffee, beans, dried beef if you have it." As Adelaide gathered the items, she found herself stealing glances at him. In the morning light, she could see his face more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and eyes that were a surprising shade of blue-green. There were lines around those eyes that spoke of long hours squinting into the sun, and a scar along his left cheekbone that was old and faded. She guessed him to be in his late 20s or early 30s. "That was a brave thing you did last night," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Foolish maybe, but brave." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "I could not simply stand by and do nothing." "Most people would have," he observed. "Most people did." She had no response to that, so she focused on measuring out the coffee beans. When she had everything ready, she tallied up the cost and told him the amount. He paid without haggling, counting out the coins carefully. "I am Blake Oliver," he said as he gathered his supplies. "I should have introduced myself properly last night." "Adelaide Lawson," she replied. "This is my store. You run it yourself." He sounded surprised but not dismissive. "I do, for 3 years now." He nodded slowly as if processing this information. "Well, Mrs. Lawson, you have a good establishment here. I appreciate your help." "It is Miss Lawson, actually," Adelaide said before she could stop herself. "Well, I suppose it is Mrs. technically, but my husband passed away some years ago." She did not know why she had volunteered that information. Perhaps it was the kind way he looked at her, without pity but with understanding. Blake Oliver's expression softened. "I am sorry for your loss," he said simply. "Thank you," Adelaide replied. "Are you just passing through Ogden, Mr. Oliver?" "I thought I was," he admitted, "but I just hired on at the Double R Ranch north of town, starting next week. Figured I had been drifting long enough, time to settle somewhere for a while." Adelaide felt an unexpected flutter of something in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or interest, or simply the acknowledgement that not everyone who came to town would leave again before she learned their names. "Well, welcome to Ogden," she said, offering him a genuine smile. I hope you find what you are looking for here." Blake Oliver smiled back, and Adelaide noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Thank you, Miss Lawson. I hope so too." After he left, Adelaide found herself humming as she continued her work, a habit she had not indulged in for years. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was simply in a good mood because the weather was fine and business was steady. But that night, when she looked at the wedding dress in her wardrobe, she did not feel the usual stab of pain. Instead, she felt something gentler, a bittersweet nostalgia mixed with something that might have been possibility. The following week passed in its usual rhythm, but Adelaide found herself looking up every time the bell chimed, hoping to see Blake Oliver walk through her door. She scolded herself for this foolishness. He was just a customer, just a cowboy who had happened to do the right thing at the right moment. There was no reason to think she would see him again, no reason to let her thoughts drift to him as she fell asleep at night. But then, on Saturday afternoon, he did return. This time he was cleaner, his hair still damp as if he had just bathed, wearing a fresh shirt. He bought more supplies, things he did not really need, Adelaide suspected, because who needed 3 new bandanas and a sewing kit after just 1 week on a ranch? They talked while she wrapped his purchases. He told her about the double R, about the foreman who was teaching him the specifics of running cattle in Utah Territory's high desert climate. She told him about her store, about the shipments that came in from Salt Lake City, about the regulars who kept her in business. It was easy conversation, comfortable in a way that surprised her. "There is a dance next Friday," Blake said as he was leaving, the words coming out in a rush as if he had been working up the courage to say them. "At the church hall. I know it is probably not appropriate for me to ask, seeing as we barely know each other, but I was wondering if you might like to attend. With me, I mean." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She had not been to a dance since before Thomas died. She had not wanted to go, and no one had asked her. She opened her mouth to decline, to say it was too soon, too improper, too complicated. But what came out instead was, "Yes, I would like that." Blake's face lit up with a smile that made Adelaide's heart skip. "Really? That is wonderful. I will come by at 7 if that suits you." "7 is perfect," Adelaide agreed, and watched him leave with a lightness in his step that matched the sudden lightness in her own chest. That week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Adelaide found herself reconsidering her acceptance a dozen times a day. What would people think? What would they say? Ogden was a small town, and everyone knew everyone's business. She was a widow, still in mourning according to society's rules, even if 3 years had passed. But another voice in her head, one that sounded suspiciously like her mother, reminded her that life was for the living, and Thomas would not have wanted her to spend the rest of her days alone. Friday arrived at last. Adelaide closed the store early, giving herself extra time to prepare. She pulled out one of her better dresses, a deep blue cotton with black trim that was respectable but pretty. She arranged her dark hair carefully, pinning it up in a style that was more elaborate than her usual practical bun. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized, one whose eyes held a spark of anticipation instead of the dull acceptance that had haunted them for so long. Blake arrived promptly at 7, wearing what were clearly his best clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, a vest that looked new. He offered her his arm, and they walked together to the church hall, making small talk about the weather and the upcoming harvest season. Adelaide was acutely aware of the eyes that followed them, of the whispers that started as they passed. She held her head high, refusing to show any shame or uncertainty. The hall was decorated with ribbons and lanterns, and a small group of musicians was already playing when they arrived. Blake proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, leading her through reels and waltzes with confidence. Adelaide had forgotten the simple joy of music and movement, of being held in a man's arms as they spun across a floor. She found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in years. During a break in the dancing, Blake fetched them both cups of punch. They stood at the edge of the hall, watching the other couples and chatting with the few people brave enough to approach them. Adelaide could feel the weight of judgment from some quarters, but she found she did not care as much as she had expected. Blake's presence beside her felt right in a way she could not fully explain. "I should tell you something," Blake said quietly, his voice almost lost in the noise of the hall. "I was married once too. My wife, Sarah, she died giving birth to our son. The baby died too. It was 5 years ago down in Colorado." Adelaide turned to look at him fully, seeing the old pain in his eyes. "I am so sorry, Blake. I thought I would never want to try again," he continued. "Thought it was safer to just keep moving, keep working, never stay anywhere long enough to put down roots. But then I came to Ogden, and I saw you standing up to that drunk, fearless even though you were half his size, and something in me woke up. Something I thought was dead." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know exactly what you mean." They left the dance early, both sensing that they had shared enough vulnerability for one evening. Blake walked her back to the store, their pace slow, neither wanting the night to end. At her door he hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her cheek, gentle and brief. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "Can I see you again?" "Yes," Adelaide whispered. "I would like that very much." After that night, Blake became a regular fixture in Adelaide's life. He visited the store several times a week, always with some excuse about needing supplies or wanting to check on something he had ordered. They began taking walks together on Sunday afternoons, strolling through the town and out into the surrounding countryside, talking about everything and nothing. Adelaide learned about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, about the war that had taken his father and 2 older brothers, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never feeling like he belonged anywhere. In turn, she told him about her marriage to Thomas, about how they had been childhood friends who had eventually fallen in love, about the dreams they had shared for their life together. She told him about the cholera, about holding Thomas's hand as he died, about the emptiness that had consumed her afterward. Blake listened without trying to fix anything, without offering empty platitudes, and Adelaide loved him for that restraint. Love. The realization hit her one day in late summer as she was restocking shelves. She loved Blake Oliver. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She had never expected to love again, had convinced herself that her heart had been buried with Thomas. But love, she discovered, was not a finite resource. Her heart was big enough to honor what she had shared with her first husband while still opening to the possibility of a future with Blake. But with that realization came fear. What if Blake did not feel the same way? What if he was simply lonely, seeking companionship but not commitment? What if she opened herself up completely only to lose him as she had lost Thomas? Adelaide found herself pulling back slightly, guarding her words, afraid to let Blake see how much he had come to mean to her. Blake noticed the change, of course. One Sunday, as they sat by the creek that ran east of town, he turned to her with concern in his eyes. "Have I done something to upset you, Adelaide?" "No," she said quickly. "Not at all." "Then why do I feel like you are slipping away from me?" His voice was gentle but direct. "These past 2 weeks, you have been different, distant. If you want me to give you space, I will. If you want me to stop calling on you, I will do that too, but please just tell me what you are thinking." Adelaide stared at the water rushing over smooth stones, gathering her courage. "I am scared," she finally admitted. "I am scared because I care for you more than I thought I could care for anyone again, and I am terrified of what that means." Blake was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I am scared too," he said. "Scared because I am falling in love with you, and the last time I loved someone I lost her. But Adelaide, I have learned something in the years since Sarah died. Being afraid of loss is no way to live. We cannot protect ourselves from pain by refusing to feel anything at all." "I am falling in love with you too," Adelaide whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I think I have been for a while now." Blake turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. "Then we will be scared together. We will take it slow as you need. But Adelaide, I want a future with you. I want to build something real, something lasting. I know it has only been a few months, but when you have been as alone as I have been, you recognize home when you find it." Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, healing tears. Blake pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun tracked across the sky and the creek sang its endless song. After that day, something shifted between them. The fear did not disappear entirely, but it became manageable, a shadow they could live with rather than a wall between them. Blake began talking about the future, carefully testing Adelaide's response. He spoke of saving money, of maybe buying a small piece of land where he could raise horses. Adelaide found herself contributing to these dreams, imagining a house with a garden, a place where she could still run her store but also have a real home. Fall arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Adelaide's store did brisk business as people prepared for winter. Blake worked long hours at the Double R, helping to move the cattle down from summer pasture. They saw each other less frequently, but the time they did have together felt precious, concentrated. One evening in October, Blake came to the store just as Adelaide was closing up. He looked nervous, his hat clutched in his hands, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Is something wrong?" Adelaide asked, concern flooding through her. "No." "Well, maybe, I do not know." Blake took a deep breath, then seemed to force himself to look directly at her. "Adelaide, would you come upstairs with me? I need to talk to you about something important, and I would rather do it in private." Adelaide's heart began to race, but she nodded and led him up to her apartment. She lit a lamp and gestured for him to sit at her small kitchen table. Instead, he remained standing, pacing back and forth in the limited space. "I have been thinking," he began, then stopped. "No, that is not right. I have been planning. Adelaide, I know we have only known each other for 6 months. I know that by some people's standards, that is not very long at all, but I also know my own heart, and I know what I want." He stopped pacing and dropped to one knee in front of her. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I am not a rich man," Blake continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I probably never will be, but I am a good man, and I will work every day for the rest of my life to make you happy. Adelaide Lawson, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was not elaborate or expensive, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. Adelaide stared at it, her mind racing. This was what she wanted, she knew that with absolute certainty. But old fears rose up, memories of another proposal, another ring, another man who had promised her forever and had been taken away far too soon. "I know you are afraid," Blake said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "I am afraid too. But Adelaide, we cannot live our lives in fear of what might happen. We have to have faith that whatever comes, we will face it together." Adelaide looked from the ring to Blake's face, seeing the hope and love and vulnerability in his eyes. She thought of Thomas, of the short but beautiful life they had shared. She thought of the wedding dress hanging in her wardrobe, the symbol of a love that had been cut short. And she realized that Thomas would want her to say yes, would want her to embrace this second chance at happiness. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Blake, I will marry you." Blake's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and laughing. "I was so worried you would say no," Blake admitted. "I have been carrying that ring around for 2 weeks, trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words." "The moment was perfect," Adelaide assured him, "and so were the words." They spent the rest of the evening making plans. They decided on a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare and to save money. Blake would continue working at the Double R, but he would also start looking for a piece of land they could buy. Adelaide would keep running her store, at least for now. They talked late into the night, imagining their future together, building castles in the air that somehow felt solid and real. News of their engagement spread quickly through Ogden. Most people were happy for them, offering congratulations and best wishes. But there were a few, like Mrs. Pritchard from the boarding house, who made their disapproval known. Adelaide overheard her in the store one day, telling another customer that it was unseemly for a widow to remarry so quickly, that Adelaide should show more respect for her late husband's memory. The words stung, but Adelaide held her head high. She knew the truth, that moving forward was not the same as forgetting, that loving again did not diminish what she had felt for Thomas. She went home that evening and opened her wardrobe, pulling out the wedding dress once more. She held it up, running her fingers over the careful stitches her mother had made. Blake found her like that an hour later when he came to take her to dinner. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Adelaide sitting on her bed, the dress spread across her lap, tears streaming down her face. "Adelaide," his voice was cautious, worried. "What is wrong?" "Mrs. Pritchard said I should not be getting married again so soon," Adelaide said, her voice thick with tears. "She said it was disrespectful to Thomas's memory, and part of me wonders if she is right. I kept this dress because I could not bear to let it go, because it was all I had left of that time. But now I am going to marry you, and I do not know what to do with it. I cannot wear it again, can I? That would be wrong, but I cannot seem to throw it away either." Blake came and sat beside her on the bed. He looked at the dress for a long moment, then at Adelaide's tear-stained face. "Can I tell you something?" he asked gently. "When Sarah died, I kept her wedding ring on a chain around my neck for 3 years. I wore it everywhere, never took it off. It was like a hair shirt, a constant reminder of what I had lost. One day, about a year before I came to Ogden, I was breaking a particularly stubborn horse. He threw me, and I hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of me. The chain broke and the ring went flying. I spent hours looking for it, tearing up the entire corral, but I never found it." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "At first, I was devastated, but then I realized something. Losing that ring did not mean I had forgotten Sarah or stopped loving her. It just meant I was finally ready to move forward. The love I had for her, the memories we made together, those are not in a piece of jewelry. They are in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. Adelaide listened, understanding flooding through her. "You think I should let the dress go?" "I think you should do whatever feels right to you," Blake said carefully. "But Adelaide, if you want to wear that dress again, you should. Not because you are erasing your past, but because you are honoring it. You are saying that you believe in love enough to try again, even after loss." What could be more respectful than that? Adelaide looked down at the dress, seeing it with new eyes. I do not think I can wear it again, she said slowly. It belongs to a different time, a different person, but maybe I do not have to throw it away either. Maybe I can alter it, make it into something new. My mother always said good fabric should not go to waste. Blake smiled and kissed her forehead. That sounds perfect. Over the following weeks, Adelaide worked on the dress in the evenings after the store closed. She carefully unpicked the seams, salvaging the beautiful lace and the best pieces of satin. She sketched new designs, imagining something that honored the past while looking toward the future. She decided to make a new dress for her wedding to Blake, using elements of the old but creating something entirely her own. Winter settled over Ogden, bringing snow and cold winds. Blake moved into a room at the boarding house in town, closer to Adelaide and the store. They spent their evenings together, Blake helping Adelaide with her sewing while she helped him practice his reading. He had learned the basics as a child but had never been comfortable with it. Adelaide was patient, finding books that interested him, reading aloud together by the light of the fire. Christmas arrived, and they attended the church service together, then had dinner with some of the other ranch hands and their families. It was not the grand celebration Adelaide remembered from her childhood, but it was warm and full of laughter, and she realized this was what family could look like, built from friendship and choice rather than just blood. As the new year of 1879 dawned, Adelaide found herself happier than she had been in years. The dress was coming along beautifully, transformed from the simple design her mother had created into something more sophisticated, with a fuller skirt, and the lace repositioned to create an elegant overlay. She worked on it in secret, wanting to surprise Blake on their wedding day. In February, Blake came to her with exciting news. A rancher about 10 miles north of town was selling off a parcel of his land, 40 acres with a good creek running through it. It was more than Blake could afford alone, but he had been saving every penny, and with Adelaide's contributions from the store, they might be able to make it work. They rode out to see the land on a cold but clear Sunday. The property was beautiful, with rolling hills and good grass, sheltered by a ridge of red rock that would provide protection from the worst winter winds. There was even a small cabin, rough but serviceable, that the previous owner had built as a line shack. "We could fix up that cabin," Blake said, his voice full of excitement as they explored the property. "Make it livable until we could afford to build something bigger. And look, Adelaide, this meadow here would be perfect for horses. I could start with just a few, breed them up slowly." Adelaide could see it all so clearly. The cabin expanded into a real house, a barn and corrals, horses grazing in the meadow. Her store in town could continue to provide steady income while Blake built his breeding program. It was a good plan, a realistic plan, one that honored both of their strengths. "Let us do it," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her decision. "Let us buy this land and build our future here." Blake swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. They rode back to town and immediately went to see the land agent, making an offer that was accepted within the week. The papers were signed, the deed recorded, and suddenly they were landowners, partners in every sense of the word. As spring approached, wedding preparations intensified. They decided to keep the ceremony small, just close friends and a few of Blake's co-workers from the ranch. Adelaide's parents had both passed away years earlier, and she had no siblings. But Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house offered to stand up with her, and one of Blake's friends from the Double R agreed to be his best man. The dress was finished a week before the wedding. Adelaide tried it on alone in her apartment, turning in front of the mirror to see how the skirt moved. The lace from her first wedding dress had been incorporated into the bodice and sleeves, a subtle nod to her past that felt right. The new fabric, a creamy white silk she had ordered specially from Salt Lake City, flowed beautifully. She looked like a bride, but not the same bride she had been at 22. This bride was older, wiser, marked by loss but not broken by it. The night before the wedding, Blake came to the store to say goodnight. Tradition dictated they should not see each other until the ceremony, and they were both taking that seriously. They stood at the door, holding hands, neither wanting to let go. "I cannot believe this is really happening," Adelaide said softly. "Sometimes I still feel like I am going to wake up and find out I dreamed you." "I am real," Blake assured her, squeezing her hands. "And tomorrow we are going to start our real life together." "Adelaide, I promise you, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." "You already are," she whispered. "You always have been." They kissed long and sweet, then Blake forced himself to pull away. "I should go before I talk myself into staying. I will see you tomorrow, my love." Adelaide watched him walk down the street, then closed and locked the door. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Tomorrow she would be married again. Tomorrow her new life would truly begin. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect spring mornings that seemed designed by heaven specifically for celebrations. Adelaide woke early, too excited to sleep. She bathed and fixed her hair, pinning it up with the pearl combs that had been her mother's. She applied a touch of rouge to her cheeks and lips, just enough to give her color. Mrs. Henderson arrived at 9 to help her into the dress. The older woman's eyes filled with tears as Adelaide turned to show her the full effect. "Oh, my dear girl," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice choked. "You look absolutely beautiful. Your mother would be so proud." "I hope so," Adelaide replied, touching the lace at her collar, remembering her mother's patient hand stitching each detail. "I hope she would understand why I am doing this." "Of course she would," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Love is always worth celebrating, no matter how many times it finds us." They walked together to the church, arriving just before 11. The ceremony was to take place at noon, and already people were beginning to gather. Adelaide waited in the small room behind the sanctuary, her hands trembling with nerves and anticipation. When the time came, Mrs. Henderson opened the door and gestured that everything was ready. Adelaide took a deep breath, picked up the small bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered that morning, and stepped into the sanctuary. Blake was standing at the altar, and the look on his face when he saw her made every moment of doubt and fear worth it. His eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly, and even from across the room Adelaide could see tears gathering. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes locked on his, the rest of the world fading away until there was only the two of them. When she reached the altar, Blake took her hand, his voice thick with emotion as he whispered, "You are wearing it." Adelaide looked down at her dress, then back up at him with a soft smile. Not the same dress, but made from it, something old becoming something new. The preacher cleared his throat, pulling their attention back to the ceremony. Adelaide barely heard the words, responding automatically to the familiar liturgy. All her focus was on Blake, on the feeling of his hand holding hers, on the promises they were making to each other. When the preacher asked if Blake would take Adelaide as his wife, his voice rang out clear and strong. "I will." And when Adelaide was asked the same question, she answered without hesitation, "I will." Blake slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and she did the same for him. Then the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Blake was pulling her into his arms, kissing her deeply as their friends cheered and applauded. The reception was held in the church hall. A simple affair with cake and punch and music provided by a local fiddler. Adelaide danced with Blake, with Mrs. Henderson, with several of the ranch hands who had become friends over the past months. She laughed more than she had in years, her face aching from smiling so much. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Blake leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Oliver, Mrs. Oliver." Adelaide tested the name in her mind and found it fit perfectly. "Yes," she said, "let us go home." They had decided to spend their wedding night at the cabin on their new land. Blake had spent the past week fixing it up, making it as comfortable as possible. They rode out together as the sun began to set, their horses loaded with supplies and wedding gifts. The cabin looked different than the last time Adelaide had seen it. Blake had repaired the roof, replaced the broken window, and built a proper door. Inside, he had constructed a real bed frame and even installed a small stove for cooking and heat. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Adelaide loved it immediately. Blake lit a fire in the stove while Adelaide unpacked their things. When the cabin was warm and cozy, he came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. Adelaide turned in his arms to face him. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again. Blake, when Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would just exist, going through the motions until it was my time to join him. But you showed me that life can surprise you, that there can be second chances, that the heart is big enough to hold more than one great love." Blake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "You saved me too," he said. "I was so lost, Adelaide. I had been lost for 5 years, just drifting, not really living. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of all they had been through, all they had lost and found again. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking quietly about their plans for the property, for their life together. Adelaide fell asleep in Blake's arms, feeling safer and more content than she had in years. The following weeks fell into a new rhythm. Adelaide continued to run her store during the week, while Blake worked at the Double R. But every evening they returned to their cabin, working together to improve and expand it. Blake proved to be skilled with his hands, building furniture and making repairs. Adelaide planted a garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the rocky soil. In June, Blake brought home their first 2 horses, a mare and a younger filly he had bought from the Double R foreman. He built a small corral and began the patient work of training the filly for riding. Adelaide loved watching him work with the animals, seeing the gentle patience he brought to every interaction. Summer passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. They rose with the sun and fell into bed exhausted each night. Their cabin slowly transformed into a real home, with curtains on the windows and rugs on the floor. Adelaide even managed to preserve enough vegetables from her garden to put up several jars for the winter. In August, Adelaide realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she tried not to get her hopes up, knowing how cruel false hope could be. But when another month passed, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She waited to tell Blake until she was certain, then chose a quiet evening when they were sitting outside watching the sunset. She reached for his hand, her heart pounding. "Blake, I have something to tell you." He turned to look at her, concern flickering across his face at her serious tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. In fact, something is very right." She took a deep breath, then said simply, "I am going to have a baby." Blake stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally pure joy. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I am sure." Blake let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. He pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." Adelaide had worried that the pregnancy might bring back painful memories for Blake, might remind him of losing Sarah and their son. But while he admitted those memories surfaced, he said they no longer carried the same power to devastate him. He had grieved, he had healed, and now he was ready to embrace this new chance at fatherhood with hope instead of fear. They told their friends about the pregnancy, receiving congratulations and advice in equal measure. Mrs. Henderson immediately began knitting tiny garments, her needles clicking away whenever Adelaide saw her. Some of the ranch wives shared their own experiences, offering tips and warnings that left Adelaide feeling both reassured and terrified. Blake became even more protective, insisting Adelaide not lift anything heavy or work too hard at the store. She tolerated his hovering for the most part, understanding it came from a place of love even when it occasionally irritated her. As fall arrived and her belly began to show, she made arrangements to hire a young woman to help in the store during the busy hours. Winter came again, their second together. They spent the long evenings by the fire, Blake reading aloud from the newspaper while Adelaide sewed tiny clothes for the baby. They discussed names, debating the merits of various family names versus something new and original. Blake wanted to name a boy after his father, while Adelaide thought they should choose something that represented new beginnings rather than honoring the past. "What about Benjamin?" Blake suggested one evening. "Not after anyone in particular, just because I like the sound of it." "Benjamin Oliver," Adelaide said slowly, testing the name. "I like that, and if it is a girl, Rose," Blake said immediately. "I have always liked that name, simple but beautiful." "Benjamin or Rose Oliver," Adelaide agreed. "Yes, I think those names will do nicely." The baby was due in late March or early April, the doctor estimated. As the date approached, Adelaide found herself growing increasingly nervous. Blake had told her what happened with Sarah, how long and difficult the birth had been, how neither mother nor child had survived. She tried not to dwell on it, but late at night when she could not sleep, fear would creep in. Blake seemed to sense her worry. One night he pulled her close and said, "You are strong, Adelaide, stronger than anyone I know. You are going to be fine, and so is our baby. I have faith in that." "I hope you are right," Adelaide whispered. "I am so afraid, Blake." "I know," he said softly. "So am I. But we are going to face that fear together, just like we have faced everything else. And on the other side, we are going to have a beautiful child to love and raise. That is worth being afraid for." Labor started on a sunny afternoon in late March. Adelaide was hanging laundry when the first pain hit, sharp enough to make her gasp and drop the wet sheet she had been holding. Blake was working with the horses in the corral, and he came running at the sound of her cry. "Is it time?" he asked, his face pale beneath his tan. Adelaide nodded, unable to speak through another contraction. Blake helped her into the cabin, then rode like mad into town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Henderson. Adelaide paced the small space, trying to remember the breathing techniques the other women had taught her, counting through each wave of pain. The doctor arrived within the hour, a calm, competent man who examined Adelaide and declared everything was progressing normally. Mrs. Henderson took charge of the cabin, boiling water and gathering clean cloths while Blake stood helplessly in the corner, looking terrified. The labor went on for hours, through the afternoon and into the evening. Adelaide had never experienced pain like this, all-consuming and relentless. She gripped Blake's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers, but he never flinched, never left her side. He whispered encouragement, wiped the sweat from her face, held her when the pain became too much and she thought she could not go on. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are so strong, Adelaide. I love you so much. Just a little longer." Finally, as the moon rose high and full outside their window, the doctor told her to push. Adelaide bore down with everything she had, screaming through the effort, and suddenly there was a new sound in the cabin, the thin, angry cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "You have a son." Mrs. Henderson quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Adelaide's arms. Adelaide stared down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at her with unfocused dark eyes, his little mouth working as if he were trying to figure out how to communicate. "Benjamin," Adelaide whispered, touching his soft cheek. "Hello, Benjamin, we have been waiting for you." Blake was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is perfect," he said, his voice shaking. "Adelaide, you did it. You brought him into the world. I am so proud of you." The next days passed in a blur of exhaustion and overwhelming love. Benjamin proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping for reasonable stretches. Blake was a devoted father, walking the floor with Benjamin in his arms when the baby fussed, changing nappies without complaint, marveling aloud at every yawn and stretch. Adelaide watched her husband with their son and felt her heart swell with a happiness she had never quite imagined. This was her family now, built from the ashes of loss and grief, testament to the resilience of the human heart. She thought of Thomas sometimes, wondered what he would think of her new life. She liked to believe he would be happy for her, would want her to embrace this second chance. Spring turned to summer, and Benjamin grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling infant. He had Blake's blue-green eyes and Adelaide's dark hair, and he seemed to find joy in everything around him. Adelaide reduced her hours at the store even further, wanting to spend as much time as possible with her son. Blake continued to build his horse breeding program, slowly gaining a reputation for producing sound, gentle animals. When Benjamin was 6 months old, they decided to expand the cabin. Blake hired a few of his friends from the Double R to help, and over the course of a month, they added 2 new rooms, a separate bedroom for themselves and a small nursery for Benjamin. They also built a proper porch, where Adelaide could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over their land. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard, but they also made time for simple pleasures, family dinners, evening walks, teaching Benjamin to clap his hands and laugh. Adelaide had never felt more content, more at peace with where her life had led her. On their second wedding anniversary, Blake surprised Adelaide with a gift. She unwrapped the brown paper to find a framed photograph, a formal portrait of the 3 of them that Blake had commissioned from the traveling photographer who had passed through town the previous month. "Look at us," Adelaide said softly, studying the image. Blake stood tall and proud, one hand on her shoulder where she sat holding Benjamin. They all looked serious as people did in photographs, but Adelaide could see the happiness beneath the formal poses. "We look like a real family." "We are a real family," Blake corrected gently. "The realest family I have ever had. Adelaide, these past 2 years with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we have both loved before, and I know those loves were real and important. But this, what we have built together, this feels like coming home after a long journey." Adelaide set down the photograph and moved into her husband's arms. "I love you, Blake Oliver. Thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me that my life was not over just because I had lost someone. Thank you for our beautiful son and our home and this life we are building together. Always, Blake promised, kissing her forehead. "I will always choose you, Adelaide, every single day." As the years passed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Benjamin became a bright, curious boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. When he was 3, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear, more confidence. She knew what to expect, knew her own strength. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose as Blake had once suggested, arrived on a snowy December morning. She had her father's smile and her mother's determination, and from her first breath, she seemed to command the attention of everyone around her. Benjamin was initially skeptical of this noisy intruder, but he quickly became the most devoted big brother imaginable, always wanting to help feed her or rock her cradle. Blake's horse breeding business continued to expand. He hired a couple of hands to help with the work and built a proper barn and several paddocks. The money was not extravagant, but it was steady, and combined with Adelaide's income from the store, they lived comfortably. They never became wealthy, but they had enough, and they had each other. When Benjamin was 7 and Rose was 4, they decided to build a new house on their property. The cabin had served them well, but they needed more space as the children grew. Blake designed a sturdy 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor where they could entertain guests. It took most of a year to complete, but when it was finished, it was everything Adelaide had dreamed of, a true family home. The day they moved in, Adelaide stood in her new bedroom, looking out the window at the land she and Blake had transformed through hard work and love. She could see Blake and Benjamin working with one of the horses in the corral, Benjamin's small hands mimicking his father's patient gestures. Rose was in the garden, probably getting herself thoroughly dirty while supposedly helping harvest vegetables. Adelaide thought back to the woman she had been when she first met Blake, bitter and lost, convinced her life was over at 25. She had been so wrong. Her life had not ended with Thomas's death. It had merely taken a turn she had not expected. The path had led her here, to this moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. She still had the photograph from her first wedding, tucked away in a drawer along with Thomas's pocket watch and a few other mementos. She looked at it occasionally, remembering that young love with fondness rather than the sharp pain of earlier years. Thomas would always be part of her story, the first chapter in a much longer book. But Blake, Benjamin, and Rose were her present and her future. That evening, after the children were in bed, Blake found Adelaide on the porch of their new house, wrapped in a shawl against the cool autumn air. He sat beside her, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Adelaide replied. "How far we have come, how different my life is from what I once imagined, how grateful I am for all of it, even the hard parts that led me here." Blake was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember the day we met? When I came into your store for supplies?" "Of course I do. You were covered in trail dust and too polite to meet my eyes." "I thought you were beautiful," Blake admitted. "But more than that, I thought you looked strong. There was something in your eyes, a determination to keep going even though life had knocked you down. I recognized it because I felt the same way. And I remember thinking, there is a woman who understands." "We understood each other from the beginning," Adelaide agreed. "Two broken people who somehow fit together to make something whole." Blake took her hand, raising it to his lips to kiss her knuckles. "You know what I think about sometimes? That conversation we had early on when you showed me your wedding dress. You were so torn up about what to do with it, whether keeping it meant you were not ready to move on. I remember, you told me about Sarah's ring, how losing it helped you let go. Right. But Adelaide, you did something better. You transformed that dress into something new. You did not erase the past, but you did not let it trap you either. You took the good parts and made them into something that honored both your history and your future. That is what we have done with our lives, with our losses. We have transformed them into something beautiful. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. When did you become such a philosopher, Cowboy? Blake laughed, the sound warm and familiar. Probably around the time I fell in love with a stubborn widow who refused to give up on life. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they heard a child's cry, then silence as whoever had woken settled back to sleep. These were the sounds of their life now, small domestic dramas, the everyday miracles of children growing and love deepening. You ever wonder what life would have been like if we had not met that night? Adelaide asked. If you had just ridden through Ogden without stopping. If I had not been brave enough to confront that man, sometimes, Blake admitted. But then I remember something my mother used to say. We can spend our whole lives wondering about the paths we did not take, or we can appreciate the one we are on. I choose appreciation. Every single day, I choose this life with you. Adelaide turned to look at him fully, seeing the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun and laughing with his children. He was older now, as was she, but he was still the same man who had knelt in her small apartment and offered her a second chance at love. I choose this too, she said softly. I will always choose this. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Benjamin grew into a young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. He talked about eventually taking over the breeding operation, expanding it beyond what Blake had built. Rose proved to be clever and creative, always sketching or writing stories, dreaming of a life beyond the ranch while still loving her home fiercely. Adelaide eventually sold her store in town, wanting to focus more on her family and the ranch. The woman who bought it had worked as Adelaide's assistant for years and was well equipped to take it over. Adelaide found she did not miss the daily routine as much as she expected. She kept busy with the household, with the garden that had grown from a small plot to nearly an acre, with the community activities and church socials that marked the rhythm of small-town life. Blake's hair went completely gray, though he remained strong and vigorous, still working with the horses every day. Adelaide found silver threads in her own dark hair, noticed new lines in her face when she looked in the mirror. They were growing old together, and she found that prospect beautiful rather than frightening. One autumn evening, when Benjamin was 17 and Rose 14, the family gathered for dinner as they always did. The conversation was lively, full of Benjamin's plans for breeding a new line of horses, and Rose's excitement about a story she had submitted to a magazine in Denver. Adelaide watched her family, her heart full, thinking how blessed she was to have this, to have lived long enough to see her children grow into remarkable young people. After dinner, Blake suggested they take a walk, just the two of them. They strolled hand in hand through the property they had built together, past the paddocks where horses dozed in the gathering dusk, through the garden where the last vegetables of the season were ripening, up the small hill that overlooked their home. I have been thinking, Blake said as they paused at the top of the hill, about how much has changed since I first rode into Ogden. I was just drifting then, not really going anywhere, not really living. And now look at all this. He gestured at the ranch spread out below them, at the house with smoke rising from its chimney, at the barn and paddocks and the life they had created. How did we get so lucky? It was not just luck, Adelaide said. We worked for this. We chose each other, chose to build something together, chose to believe in love even after we had both lost it once. That takes courage, Blake. We were brave. Blake turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. You were the brave one first. That night you stood up to that drunk, putting yourself at risk for someone you did not even know. That was the moment I knew you were special, that you were someone worth knowing. And you were the one who gave me permission to love again, Adelaide replied. When you said I could wear the dress again if I wanted, that it would not dishonor Thomas's memory to move forward. That freed me, Blake. You gave me back my future. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life from grief and hope in equal measure. Below them, they could see Benjamin coming out of the barn, Rose hanging laundry on the line even though it was almost too dark to see. Their children, strong and healthy and happy. You remember what I said to you when I proposed? Blake asked. Adelaide smiled. You said a lot of things. You were quite nervous as I recall. I said I was not a rich man and probably never would be, but I would work every day to make you happy. I hope I kept that promise. You did, Adelaide assured him. Every single day you have kept that promise. I have been happy, Blake. Happier than I ever thought possible. And it is not because of wealth or status or any of those things people think matter. It is because you chose me and you kept choosing me year after year. Blake pulled her close, kissing her softly. I will keep choosing you for as long as we both live, and beyond if heaven allows it. They walked back to the house together, their pace slower now than it had been in their youth, but their hands just as tightly clasped. Inside, the house was warm and bright, their children's voices carrying through the rooms. This was home, Adelaide thought. Not the building or the land, though those were important. Home was the people inside, the love that bound them together, the memories they had made and continued to make every day. That night, lying in bed beside her husband of many years, Adelaide thought about the wedding dress that had hung in her wardrobe all those years ago. She had transformed it, just as Blake had said, taking the beautiful parts of her past and incorporating them into something new. The lace and satin had become a dress that honored both loves, both chapters of her life. And now that dress was packed away in a trunk, waiting for the day Rose might want it for her own wedding, another generation carrying forward the legacy of love and resilience. Blake. Adelaide whispered into the darkness. His voice was drowsy, already half asleep. Thank you for everything. For loving me, for giving me this family, for showing me that endings can also be beginnings. Blake pulled her closer, his arms warm and familiar around her. Thank you for saying yes. That day in your apartment when I was terrified you would refuse me. Thank you for being brave enough to try again. I will always say yes to you, Adelaide murmured, in this life and whatever comes after. They drifted off to sleep together, two people who had survived loss and found love again, who had built something lasting from the broken pieces of their former lives. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the horses stirred in their barn, and the world kept turning. But inside that house, love abided, constant and sure, a testament to the healing power of hope and the courage to begin again. The years continued their steady march, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, new joys and inevitable sorrows. Blake and Adelaide grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They became fixtures in Ogden, the couple everyone pointed to as proof that love could endure, could transform, could heal even the deepest wounds. When they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out for the party. Benjamin and Rose had organized everything, decorating the church hall with flowers and ribbons, arranging for music and dancing and enough food to feed everyone twice over. Adelaide wore her best dress, and Blake wore a new suit his children had bought him for the occasion. As they stood together to cut the cake, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends they had collected over a lifetime, Adelaide looked at her husband and saw both the young cowboy who had walked into her store all those years ago and the old man he had become. Both versions were dear to her. Both were the great love of her second chance at life. Speech. Someone called from the crowd, and soon others took up the chant. Blake held up his hands for quiet, and the room gradually settled. He cleared his throat, suddenly emotional, and Adelaide took his hand, lending him her strength as she had done so many times before. "Adelaide and I have been married for 50 years, Blake began, his voice still strong despite his age. "That is a long time, longer than we ever expected when we started out. We have been blessed beyond measure, with our children and grandchildren, with this community, with each other. But I want you all to know something important. Adelaide and I, we were not always together. We both loved before, and we both lost those loves to death and sorrow. When we found each other, we were broken people, not sure we would ever be whole again." He paused, looking down at Adelaide with such love that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "But we learned something important. We learned that the human heart is resilient, that it can love more than once, that endings can become beginnings if we are brave enough to try." Adelaide was brave first. She stood up for what was right. She chose to risk her heart again. She showed me that life was still worth living. And every day since then, she has continued to be brave, to be strong, to be the best partner a man could ask for. Blake turned to address the crowd again. "So if you take anything from our 50 years together, let it be this. Do not be afraid to love, even if you have been hurt. Even if you have lost. Even if it seems safer to stay closed off and protected. Because love is what makes life worth living. Love is what transforms us. Love is what lasts." The room erupted in applause, and Adelaide could see many people wiping away tears. Blake pulled her close and kissed her, and she kissed him back, not caring who was watching, grateful for every moment they had shared and every moment yet to come. They danced that night, moving slowly across the floor to music that reminded them of that first dance so many years ago. Adelaide rested her head against Blake's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling the warmth of his arms around her. 50 years, she murmured. "How did we get so lucky?" "Not luck," Blake replied, echoing what she had said to him years before. "Choice. We chose each other, chose love, chose to build a life together. That was brave, Adelaide. We were brave." "We were," she agreed. "And we still are." The party continued late into the night, filled with music and laughter and the warmth of community. When it finally ended and Blake and Adelaide returned home to the ranch, they stood together on the porch, looking out at the land they had built together, at the life they had created from grief and hope. "No regrets?" Blake asked softly. "Not a single one," Adelaide replied. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner. But then again, maybe we needed to walk our separate paths first. Maybe we needed to lose and grieve and heal before we could fully appreciate what we found together." "Maybe," Adelaide agreed. "All I know is that I would not change a thing. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment led me here to you, to this life. And I am grateful for all of it." They went inside together, to the house that had sheltered their love for so many years, to the bed they had shared through joy and sorrow, comfort and challenge. They lay down together, bodies fitting together from long habit, hands clasped beneath the quilts Adelaide's grandmother had made a lifetime ago. "I love you," Blake whispered. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Adelaide replied. "Thank you for asking me to wear the dress again. Thank you for showing me that second chances are real." They drifted off to sleep, secure in their love, grateful for the life they had built, ready to face whatever time they had left together. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, eternal and distant. But inside that house, love burned bright and warm, a light against the darkness, a promise kept for 50 years and counting. Blake and Adelaide lived several more years after that anniversary, each day a gift they treasured. They watched grandchildren grow and marry, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, continued to work the land that had become part of their very souls. When the end came, first for Blake and then, a few months later, for Adelaide, they faced it with the same courage they had brought to every challenge in their long life together. The townspeople of Ogden mourned their passing, but also celebrated lives well lived, loves deeply felt, a legacy that would continue through the generations they left behind. Benjamin took over the ranch, continuing to breed horses with the same care and patience his father had taught him. Rose became a successful writer, though she always returned to Ogden for holidays and special occasions, always carried her parents' love story in her heart. Years later, when Rose's own daughter married, she wore a dress made from the same lace and satin that had adorned Adelaide at both her weddings. The story was passed down, becoming family legend. The widow who kept her wedding dress, the cowboy who said she would wear it again, the love that proved second chances are real and that the human heart is capable of healing, growing, loving again and again. Their graves sat side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, two simple headstones that marked the final resting place of Blake and Adelaide Oliver, beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, but above all, beloved to each other. And on certain evenings when the light hit just right and the wind whispered through the grass, people said you could almost feel their presence, two spirits still together, still choosing each other, still proof that love once found never truly ends.